guest, Dean Lambert of the Love Always Project, knows firsthand how difficult it is to make funeral arrangements, even with knowledge gained in over 30 years working with funeral professionals. You're connected with the Heart of Hospice. I'm Helen Bauer, here with Jerry Fenter.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at GrandPad. Do you have an older family member who's isolated, or do you feel disconnected from a senior loved one who lives at a distance? The folks at GrandPad have come up with the perfect solution, an easy-to-use device that connects older adults with family and friends using video chat, email, photo sharing, and more. Visit grandpad.net for details.
Our guest today, Dean Lambert, who is the lead for the Love Always Project, is this perfect blend: personal experience, wisdom, skills that he's gained through over 30 years of working in an industry that collaborates with funeral professionals all over the place. He's got this perfect storm of story and skill.
Right. It's a sweet spot, is what you could call it. It's a sweet spot for him. He also has this personal experience. So after 30 years of working with the funeral industry, this personal experience really brought home to him why it's so important to pre-plan a funeral. So
Dean Lambert has worked to serve families facing one of the most challenging moments of their lives, the loss of a loved one. As a father who has himself experienced the loss of a child, he knows firsthand the grief that clouds the vision needed to honor a life well lived. Dean is leading the Love Always Project with a team of experienced subject matter experts and people committed to its purpose, which is encouraging people to think more positively and proactively about end-of-life issues and funeral prearrangement.
We've talked many times about advanced care planning, but I don't think we've ever talked about the need to pre-plan your funeral either. And so we want to use this as an opportunity for this topic to really become front and center, because it really is important. So I like what the Love Always Project is doing. They're emphasizing this need and also helping to make it happen for people, using their resources and their knowledge to help people make those decisions that they need to make. So Dean's going to tell his story, but he's also going to talk about the need that's there and what the Love Always Project can do. So here's our conversation with Dean Lambert of the Love Always Project. Dean, it's so good to have you on the Heart of Hospice podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
So we know that in your job with the Love Always Project, you get the opportunity to travel quite a bit. And we're always curious, just out of curiosity's sake, for no other reason. But tell us where you enjoy traveling to.
Well, I guess my two favorite places to travel to are, I love the Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina area. I'm trying to convince my Midwest-born wife that it would be a great place to end up our days. Both of our kids one lives in Boston and one lives in Washington, D.C. I don't want to live up there, but there's less extreme weather. But speaking of extreme weather, the other of my favorite places to travel is Arizona. I love Arizona. Scottsdale and Phoenix are kind of warm, and Mesa gets hot, and I just like that desert vibe. But Sedona and that whole area is just, from nature perspective and everything else, it's getting pretty crowded. But I love traveling there, and it's for more than just the climate. So there are extreme conditions there, and especially where you go in the state. You know, Prescott's beautiful. They get 4 seasons up there. So we'd love to retire there one day, but that is a little too far away for when the children start having children. So.
This is true.
True.
Yeah.
And there are 4 seasons. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Prescott.
Yeah, you'll get. Yeah, they get in Prescott. It's high up enough that you'll get some snow in the winter. They often get a white Christmas, but it goes away pretty quick.
Right.
That
Yeah.
sounds awesome, actually.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
doesn't
and my
it?
brother lives down in Houston, where you guys are from, so I go there quite a bit, and it's not a bad place. He lives up near Porter, Texas. So
Yeah. We only have 2 seasons here.
yeah,
Yeah, it's either
Hot and
hot or
hotter.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah.
it. Well, Dean, we are so glad that you're here with us today to talk about the Love Always project. So we'd like to know, how did this project get started? What inspired you to work with this organization?
Well, we started it because we know that there are a lot of people who are thinking about end of life and are dealing with end of life. And as we were doing some social listening, we know that there are a lot of conversations about it that are prompted by, celebrity deaths. I'm a big Foo Fighters fan. And when Taylor Hawkins died, I've met them a couple times. And I was really bummed out about that and affected by that. And in some cases, maybe more so than death of a family member, which you'd have a closer relationship with. So these kinds of things intrigued me and other people on the team, where we knew that under the surface, people are talking about this. And people will buy life insurance. They'll plan for end of life, but they'll do all the surface stuff. They don't really think about planning the funeral in advance like they do other milestone events. And we have enough research to know that when people do prearrange and pay for their funerals in advance, the statistics show high satisfaction. Like, nobody says they're unsatisfied with that decision. And 60% or more say they've either recommended it to a family member or friend within a month of doing it, or they plan to recommend it. So when you have high satisfaction to the point where people are willing to proactively recommend it, we know that they think, and we have a lot of verbatims around the research, that it's a good thing to do. It's a smart thing to do. They feel it's the right thing to do. They're protecting their family, but nobody's really talking about it. And a lot of those people say that the hardest thing about starting the prearrangement was knowing how to get started and where to go. And often the trigger for somebody to prearrange is that they just attended a funeral for a family member or friend. But nobody's really, it's not obviously you're not seeing social, conversations about it. There aren't a lot of websites except for funeral home websites and things like that, which not a lot of people are Googling these days unless they have a need. And oftentimes it's too late to prearrange. So we thought what we would do is use all of our subject matter expertise in funeral planning and grief support and all of the other things that go around, the actual planning of the funeral and setting aside funds, that we would create this space where people could come together and learn about this really important thing to do. And not important because we think it's important because consumers who do it think it's important. That's how it started.
So the mission of Love Always then is to really encourage people to make those arrangements for their funerals, to do some funeral planning in advance, so to speak.
Yes. And what that means is that you're kind of forced to talk about death, because it's not like life insurance where you're putting money away for, what people think it's for, which is that'll cover my end of life expenses or whatever. Life insurance, when I pass, I hope that I have enough life insurance that supports my family, my wife, if I predecease her is the word. Maybe she could pay off the mortgage. Maybe there's some left over for, my kids or kids. That's what that's sort of meant for. There are specific types of funding programs for end of life expenses. Those don't often cover, everything that a person might want in their final farewell. And we just think it's healthy to talk about it. And in the ways that we encourage people to talk about end of life is not to talk about what do you want when you die, or, tell me about what you want to have done with your money and what your final wishes are, mom, dad. It's more starting conversations about the life, because what you really want to do is know as much about the person, their interests, their fears, their hopes. Talk about those kinds of things. And that will help you formulate a funeral plan that is meaningful for the people who will be left, and that gives peace of mind for the person who's going to die, that they'll have not only a proper tribute, but that nobody will have to pay for it when I die. And they won't have to go through that financial or emotional burden that we know happens. The experience of planning a funeral when somebody dies, which I have experienced, your brain's just not there. You just don't know what you're doing. You make decisions Some people blame the funeral director for not slow playing when somebody's, buying the most expensive casket or, doing 3 days of visitation instead of 1 day or whatever. But really, they're there to help guide you and facilitate the things you think you want. Not so much, steering you away from things unless you have a religious question or something of what do people do, or a veteran question if a veteran died. So really, there's such a thing as emotional overspending, but then there's also a thing about guilt, which goes upon the top of your grief if you miss something, because you get one shot at it. So I always tell people, well, don't ask the person about what they want to happen when they die. Just start talking about their life. Your dad and mom's been married for 65 years. Have you ever asked if they had a girlfriend or a boyfriend or significant other before they got married? And did they break up with you, or did you break up with them? Every family has interesting stories that may be meaningful to reflect upon at the funeral. And if you don't capture those while somebody's alive, that's not talking about death. That's talking about their life.
Sure.
And so that's kind of what we encourage.
So how does Love Always help to facilitate those kinds of conversations or to make those kinds of decisions? How does Love Always make that happen?
Well, that's a good question. So right now, as of today, we launched officially maybe a month and a half ago. So we're building a lot of expert content, blogs and articles. We have a few family stories up there. We have a video that talks about, what the movement is. We feel it's a grassroots movement to get people talking about this kind of end of life, material. We just today launched a secure, safe forum on the website. So if you join the Love Always Project, which basically means give us your email, tell us what brought you to the Love Always Project. I have I want to know more about funeral pre-planning. I just experienced the death of somebody close and I'm grieving. I forget what the categories are, but you could go in and we want the vast majority of content to come from people who join the movement. Everybody has a story, a concern. There are lots of caregivers out there who would love to be a part of that group and offer advice on the forum. And so we also have a community manager who is there to help guide and watch the conversations to make sure they don't turn into what they shouldn't be. And then we have subject matter experts, whether they're clinicians or people like myself who've been around funeral planning for a long, long time, who can not only provide personal stories, but some guidance to ask questions or reflect a question back out to the group, because we want to encourage those conversations. I mean, face it, we all listen more to people that we feel close to, that we trust. And I think if we build the right kind of community and we continue to look at this as a grassroots movement that has a quality altruistic purpose, that people will begin to talk amongst themselves, recommend it to others. And it gives us a chance to really hear what people are saying and to understand their needs, which will drive the expert content, or will drive us to create more value-based features so that folks are more attracted to the Love Always Project. Eventually, I would love to see, regional meetings, virtual meetings, where people who are members or people who are interested in talking about end-of-life issues in a healthy, constructive way, where we have meetups. Or we can participate in other kinds of functions. There's a big group called End Well that holds a conference in San Francisco every year. And we would love to be a part of that. And obviously participating in podcasts like this helps us, offer what we can to the existing community that's dealing with grief and elder issues and aging and things like that. So the Love Always Project will grow in the amount of features and value that we provide, but it's going to be user driven. And we purposefully wanted this to be a grassroots movement. The public relations and marketing firm that we're using to help facilitate, because I don't have all the resources that I need. You need people who have specific energy and specific information on how to do this. But we chose an agency that's good at starting grassroots efforts, movements, as opposed to a regular, splashy ad agency that does brand management. Certainly, we want the Love Always Project to be a brand. I'm wearing a T-shirt that has the logo on it, but we want that brand to be more owned by consumers than any other brand is, because the conversation is theirs, and there's a rich amount of personal life experience that others can learn from that we hope gets shared.
There's such a different type of engagement. You know, if you're selling a TV and you have a chat about TVs on your website, that's way different than the conversation that you're having. You're talking about an engagement on a personal level, and ownership inside an experience.
Right. And we have to build trust. You got to build trust
Exactly.
for people to be able to feel like they can share.
Right.
So that's, again, why we're, participating in podcasts, why we're looking at grief writers that have a national presence, influencers that have large followings, because, for us to herald it and advertise it, again, you can build a brand that way, but not around this type of conversation.
Right. It comes down to the fact that it's personal.
Absolutely.
It's personal. So with that in mind, can we touch back on your personal experience?
Sure, absolutely.
So you have over 30 years of experience in your professional career working in an industry that works with funeral professionals all the time. You know the ins and outs of the industry, what pre-planning looks like, et cetera. But you had a personal experience where you needed to make funeral arrangements, and it affected you in a way you really hadn't expected.
No, it's still affecting me, probably because I'm not taking the advice of people who specialize in grief and seeking some sort of counseling. But that's for another podcast, I guess. But yes, this will be the 7th year that we're going to be remembering and celebrating my son, Adam, who was in the Marine Corps. He served in Afghanistan. He was stationed in Okinawa. Bright, funny person who was extremely empathetic. Everybody came to him with their problems because he was able to help them sort of see how, the kinds of things that people face that they think is going to be in the end of their lives or the end of their careers or relationships or whatever. He was able to somehow get them to see, that whatever they feared may not be the worst thing, or how not to fear it. He memorized every a comedy movie from, you name it, Adam Sandler, every, the Jim Gaffigan stand-ups. As a matter of fact, at his funeral, we played those in the background, mixed in with some of his favorite songs. And it made people laugh, and they were like, oh, yeah, we get it. But Adam is part of the statistic you hear about in the U.S., which is the 22 a day, the 22 veterans who I almost said commit suicide. And the one blessing about this project for me is that I'm learning as I'm going. And I was asked a question about why I didn't say that my son died by suicide, which is a currently appropriate way to say it. But I'm almost 60, so, committing suicide is what we have said in the past. So I'm trying to make that change. But he died by suicide. It was one of the most strategically and tactically planned things I had ever seen. So he really meant to be done, and the main crux of the story for me is that my wife and I both work with funeral professionals. She's traveling right now, working with funeral homes to help them with their marketing and promotions of advanced funeral planning and whatever. And so we both have been in the business for quite a while. And so when Adam died, we went to the funeral home that we knew. And right, as a matter of fact, when I found him in one of those most peaceful areas, very close to my home along a riverbank, I found him and I made certain calls. So I tend to go right into go mode, right? I wanted to be a doctor growing up. I've worked as a volunteer with ambulances and things. So I run towards the danger, right? So I made my calls. First call I made was to the captain of our Patriot Guard Riders, which I'm not sure if you're familiar. Patriot Guard Riders was founded 12 years ago in response to some of the protests that were going on at veterans' funerals. So motorcyclists and people who are of like minds, you don't have to be on a motorcycle, will come and we still escort and stand at those funerals with American flags and provide a memento to the deceased person's family. So Adam had ridden with me the year before he died in the Patriot Guard, and I've been on a ton of missions. So I called our captain and I said, Adam passed away. And of course, we had a discussion there. Called the funeral home, knew exactly who we were going to talk to about it. I mean, I just remember who I have to call first. It was just boom, 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 right? So flash forward the next day and we go to the funeral home to plan this. And I have to really thank John Wild, the funeral director that took us through this process, because he knows that you have to have a process, because if you don't follow the process, you leave something out. Now, that's partially selfish in a good way on the funeral director's part, because they want to make sure you have a great experience. But also there are certain things that have to happen in a certain order, because you ask certain questions first to get you to the next questions, right? So he had his finger on this checklist that his finger was almost turning like white, because Jill and I would drift off and share something as we talked about each thing. And so he was putting his finger right where, so it wouldn't slip, and this guy's been a funeral director for a really long time. So we finally got to this place. So one of the things I always recommend to funeral directors is that, veterans memorials are very special. And from a public relations standpoint, which sounds silly to think about, but it's important, that people see you at your work. That gives them an example of what the experience they might have can be. So there's a thing called a Harley hearse. It's a caisson that is towed behind a tricycle, Harley Davidson, or a two-wheeled if you're really good. And there's a guy that makes these amazing Harley hearses. I must have helped to sell 50 of those for this guy, and they're not cheap. And so I knew all about that. So we're getting to the part of the funeral plan, and we're talking about the livery meaning the cars, the hearse, which in funeral business you call the coach, flower car, family car, things like that. And then he says, obviously, we have the Harley hearse, right? You do want that, right? And that was the first time I felt like, somebody hit me in the head. I should have had a V8 where I realized that, my son was dead. Because up until that moment, I thought I had my poop in a group. I thought I would have it together, knew all the answers, been in funeral homes, so it wasn't icky for me. I was just going through it with my wife. That was a moment where my face must have turned white. Like the funeral director asked if I needed something. I must have looked, I was sitting in a chair. I must have looked unstable. My wife had an afraid look on her face. I'm like, no, I'm okay. What's going on? It was so on a level that I would never be able to understand. You always think that if you had a stroke or something happen, that you would be able to control your fall, or if you're driving, God forbid something happens, you'd be able to bring to a controlled stop, right? You'd think that. Not true. When something happens in your brain like that, it happens. At the same time, I was thinking, my gosh, how could I have forgotten that? And I'm beating myself up about it. It's just your brain shuts off. And so then I realized that we have to slow down for a minute here and go back to make sure that I wasn't confidently answering things that I should have taken a minute. Can we go back? Because I want to make sure I didn't miss anything else. So we waited about a half hour till I actually felt better, until John and my wife felt better, because that doesn't happen to me. I don't have tears when I cry. I don't even think I've really cried over Adam. My brain shut down. And so this is another reason why I'm so passionate about advanced funeral planning. We knew some things. The Marines and other services make, their people write home and say, in the event of my death, this is what I want. So we knew Adam wanted to be cremated. We knew on his dog tags that his religious preference. So we knew things, but we didn't have a lot of details. So there were still a lot of decisions that had to be made with our daughters. And then the other thing was that the Marines, because I'm Jewish, my wife isn't Jewish. So technically my kids, unless they convert, aren't Jewish. In Judaism, the mom has to be Jewish. My youngest daughter did convert. And it was because Adam's conviction to Judaism. But in Judaism, you use a wooden casket, wooden dowels. There's no metal in the casket, and the casket has holes in the bottom. If you have a vault, if the cemetery requires a vault and you're going to bury in the casket and not cremate, the vault doesn't have a bottom to it. It's only there structurally, so the ground is strong. And it's because Jews believe in ashes to ashes, dust to dust right away. So most Jews are buried in 24 hours. Well, after Adam died, we got all of these messages from his Marine comrades that wanted to come to the funeral, but they're all young people and they don't have a lot of money, so they can't jump on a plane. So they piled into cars and drove from both coasts, which took a full 24 hours. Not only that, Jews don't have open caskets typically, and they wanted to see him. So we had to talk to the funeral director about restorative arts. part of the embalming process, which we weren't going to do because we were going to cremate. So we wanted to honor those Marines, which meant they had to call a guy out of retirement who specializes in the kinds of injuries Adam had as a result of his death. And he literally rebuilt, Adam so that the Marines could have a final picture. These are all things that happen, whether you plan them or not, when these things happen. Even when somebody has a diagnosis and they have a week, a month to live, planning at that time is not the same as if it's planned, months or years before that, just because you're going through things like anticipatory grief. Right. So this is why I'm passionate about it. This is why a lot of people are passionate about it, because you get very surprisingly silly. Even the most rational and together people who have faced all kinds of, terrible things, when it happens to somebody you love, a child, mother, sibling, doesn't matter. I would never say me losing a child, the pain of that is any worse than any other kind of loss, even though people acknowledge losing a child is very difficult. Everybody handles it differently. So this is really my passion and the reason why I'm driving this, because I think that, again, it's been 7 years and I'm positive that I have issues I haven't dealt with yet. And I didn't go into his death and his burial at the Veterans Cemetery in a way that I probably, that would have been easier if there were more details and if it was, further in advance. So sorry for the long story, but you asked.
No, we wanted to hear your story. So when it comes to families who are having these conversations, what do you think is the biggest barrier? We all know it's going to happen. We all know it's going to happen, but we don't like having the conversations. What do you think really is the biggest thing that gets in the way?
Well, I can tell you personally, and from the research that we've done, the biggest barrier for some people is they think that if they talk about death or the end of life planning, that it's going to happen.
Right.
There are certain cultures that believe that. Okay. But in the Western culture, we have done a really good job of insulating ourselves, and I don't mean that in a good way, from death and dying. Back in the Civil War, when pretty much embalming started happening, it was sort of invented and mainstream back then when Civil War veterans had to be transported home. And that's really where the whole embalming movement came from. But you would bring that deceased home and they would be laid out on a dining room table or in a parlor, which is why they call it funeral parlor. And the family and everybody was there. You put, curtains over the windows. Everybody wore black. They had a certain period of mourning, and that individual was right there. A lot of times you dug the grave and you had a family space. That's what they did. These days, starting when your elderly family members start to get difficult to take care of, what do? We put them in a nursing home. And we feel good about visiting them and feel good that it's a good place and that there's other people that they can, relate to if they have their faculties and if they're not, dealing with some of these other illnesses like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. You believe that they're getting good care, but you're going about your life, right? And so we just aren't as equipped as we once were to talk about, how people, want to be taken care of and what kinds of a tribute they might want or not want. And then the whole disposition thing, meaning, do you want to be cremated and buried? Do you want to be cremated and scattered? Do you not want to be cremated and buried? So there's so many options and they're personal. And I don't think people even think, they don't know what they don't know. But those are the barriers, is that there's this insulation. But we are starting to hear under the surface, in humorous ways or crass ways. We all have that relative who says, don't spend any money on me, just, cremate me and throw me by the side of the road, right?
Throw me in the ditch.
Totally a defense mechanism, meaning I don't want to talk about it. Exactly. I don't want to think about it, whatever. And it's a very real fear. I know folks who, when they get into their 70s or mid 70s, regardless of how healthy they are, they start thinking about the potential time they have left on Earth. Their brain thinks they're 50, but their body is 75, and they have huge anxiety because they're thinking about, wow, there's no way I'm living 20 more years. I'm going to turn 60 in January, and I'm starting to have those feelings right now. How long can I possibly live? So when people say, yeah, 30 years from now, and I'm like, 30 years from now, I'd be 90.
Right.
I mean, and so these are the reasons why people don't want to talk about it. The reasons people should talk about it is because we don't communicate as much as we used to communicate. And so we don't know the stories of our lives. And that's really what a send-off, a better farewell, so to speak, is all about, is being able to tell stories about the person who died. Funny, crass, sad, bad, mad, whatever it is. The best send-offs, whether you do something simple in your house or a grand funeral in a church or a synagogue or at a funeral home, the best ones are those where people gather and are able to reflect upon the life. And that's not just, look, I haven't had a lot of deaths in my family, so I'm telling you this from the research that we've done. And the comments that people send to funeral homes or cremation providers after a funeral where people come together and share and laugh. And most importantly, that they're not having to make all of these decisions and spend more money or any money when they might not be financially prepared, because it can be expensive, whether it's $1,000 or $10,000. Right. So again, those are the reasons why people, don't talk about it. It's just something they don't want to face. Yet we'll buy life insurance. Why? Well, because it's not there to pay for my death. It's there to help you live after I die. Even if you intend for it to be spent on funeral expenses. And if the recipients of the benefit intend to pay for a funeral with life insurance, for some reason we don't feel as bad about buying life insurance. It's a good thing to have. Trust me, but
it just sounds better.
It sounds better. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and haven't the last 2 years, Dean, shown us how much we need those rituals and those services and those conversations, celebrations, homegoings, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. Because we were deprived of them. And all of a sudden we realized what an important thread that is inside our culture in the United States, regardless of what religion, if any organized religion you subscribe to. Not having those opportunities to gather, to talk, to cry together, to mourn together. I think that was a huge influence. That's to me a big eye opener, because we're restricted from doing those things over the last 2 years.
Yeah, and I can tell you from experience of the profession, you are spot on. And I remember as we were watching the pre-planning activity, and, throughout the pandemic, especially at the onset, I kept thinking of, and I'm not sure what the demographics of your listeners are, but I'm going to mention the movie The Big Chill and the Rolling Stones song, "You Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone."
Yeah.
This is really a phenomenon that happened throughout the pandemic, and we're seeing the results of people not being able to gather for funerals. So, when they had to limit gatherings or not have gatherings at all, we noticed there were many more people having a harder time dealing with the death of the individual, especially if they died from COVID and they couldn't see them, from the onset till the end. And today, when you look at what people are doing for their prearrangements, we're seeing record numbers of people prearranging. Funeral homes they're very busy with advanced funeral plans. And they're also seeing larger transactions in terms of the types of funerals that people are planning. Our prearrangements that we're seeing happen, the sizes of those prearrangements are going. So, for example, before the pandemic, we were around $5,100. When you that's the average between a funeral that involves cremation as disposition, and a funeral that might involve cremation, but where there's a casket involved and a longer visitation. We're seeing that. So we were at about $5,100 before the pandemic, and it was kind of falling because of people were kind of reeling still from the recession we had in 2008. We saw it really drop, but we have seen a steady increase in funeral amounts and also prearrangement amounts. And that's because people are valuing the gathering more than they ever have before. Now, where they have that gathering, it could be. Now, what's reflected in the prices they're paying is that a lot of times they'll do it at the funeral home, but often it's at the church or in a park depending on the weather and things like that. But I agree with you 100%. Based on what we're seeing, people really understood the value of coming together when they did not have their sphere around them, that bubble that throws a warm blanket over the immediate family of the deceased. It's vital. And that's why, I know being Jewish, we talk about the Shiva. You're sitting for days where people come into your home, and so you're forced to think about it, and you're forced to talk to your family and tell stories. There's a movie about it. And I forget, Jane Fonda was in it, but it was a family that was doing Shiva, but the family was really dysfunctional. By the end of the movie, they had worked a lot of stuff out just from being in the same room together, right? And they learned a lot about things, which I won't spoil the movie. But the main thing is that there was a constant flow of people coming into the house that both distracted them from, the death, but also at the same time went to the other extreme where it caused them to focus on that death in any given moment, depending on what that person who came into the house wanted to share. And so all healthy stuff that people missed during the pandemic.
Today's episode is sponsored by the team at GrandPad. They recognize that older people can be intimidated by technology. GrandPad is created to be easy to set up and effortless to use. The device allows for email, games, music, and photo and video sharing. The video chat feature came in so handy when my family couldn't visit my mom during the pandemic. She loved seeing photos of her grandkids and great-granddaughter. My brother acts as administrator for my mom's GrandPad. When he has a question, GrandPad customer service is quick and easy to understand. My brother was even able to give my mom instructions that she could follow over the phone. GrandPad comes with 4G LTE cellular service already included, so there's no need for Wi-Fi. Creating a family network is as simple as sending an email. When I got the email, I just downloaded the app and signed in. As part of her private network, I can share my photos and see what other members of the network are sharing. At 88 years old, my mom sent her first email. She was so proud of herself and excited to learn to manage technology. GrandPad keeps my mom connected with our family and can keep you connected to your family too. You can find more details at grandpad.net. Now back to today's episode.
So I know that you're obviously a proponent of doing pre-planning for funerals, but what are some of the pitfalls of not having a funeral planned? What can happen if someone doesn't have a funeral planned?
Yes. So the biggest thing that a consumer will tell you is that they don't want to leave a financial or emotional burden to their family. They don't want to leave the decisions to the family because there are a lot of them. Gathering papers, making sure that if somebody wanted last rites of honors, military honors. A lot of veterans spent 4 years in the military. It was the best times of their lives and the worst times of their lives, and for some people, they carry it with them their whole lives. And that 4 years was so important. They definitely want military honors. There's other people who are like, no. I don't want that. That was a small part of my life. And so if you don't know what that individual wants, you could do military honors for somebody that would be possibly more meaningful to the people there. But a lot of people may not realize that the person was in the military because they didn't talk about it, which is another reason you should talk about it. Mm-hmm. The other example I can give you is family conflict. So let's say you're in a family where there were 3 brothers and a sister, or just 4 kids, 1 who moved away, 2 who moved close, but they call mom or dad once in a while, and 1 who, for some reason, through the grace of their heart or whatever, was the caretaker for mom or dad. That caretaker gets very intimate during those times with things like what do you want, what don't you want, to the nature of the type of care that you have. So you feel very possessive of that individual because of the care that you gave to them. When that person dies, if there is not a prearrangement in place, everybody gathers together and they talk about the funeral. And the caretaker says, well, Dad and I talked and he wants to be cremated and he doesn't want a really big service. He just wants a small family gathering. And what do you suppose the person who moved away 10 years ago and hardly writes or calls says when they go in?
Yeah,
Unless they're from California or a state where there's high cremation, they're probably going to say, we're Catholics or we're Jewish. We don't believe in that. There's no way. When they don't know the trends, where most religions don't, ban cremation or things like that. They obviously want you to have some religious ritual, but that person says, no way, no way. We're not, no. So all of a sudden you have conflict. Then it's, well, who's paying for this? Well, dad had life insurance. Yeah, but what's mom going to live on? They sold their house and, you just don't know. All of a sudden, the worst time in that family's life becomes even worse because they might have been kind of close and fine with the way things moved around. Maybe people moved around and they might have Zoomed it for holidays, or maybe they get together every other year. You think they're going to want to get together after they fight about the money and that one thing that you can't get wrong, which is whether to cremate or not cremate dad? So that's another reason why you should somehow find a way to talk about it. The other thing I can just tell you from personal experience is my wife's father died in February, and they were good financially. He was a great saver, and he talked about what funeral home he wanted. He was only ill for a little while, from Christmas till February, and in fact, he didn't have COVID or anything. He just had really bad pneumonia, and then they found he had cancer for a while that he didn't tell anybody. So either one of those could have done him in. So my mother-in-law and all the kids got together, and they did not have any arguments. A great, great family, great group of siblings who just love each other so much. I wasn't in the arrangement, but obviously my wife was, and she kind of held back because she was the expert. So when they asked her advice, she, carefully gave advice, knowing that everybody has an opinion. Advice and opinion are two different things. And so after they planned everything out and everything, my mother-in-law got home and we were all there with her, but she found a moment to go into her bedroom and kind of just look at things. And she confided in I think, my wife, and said, gosh, I didn't know that's, how much I was spending. So during the planning, they picked a gorgeous casket for him. Okay. I was surprised because I knew it was like the second most expensive casket you could buy, but it was beautiful. He looked great. It was a wonderful service. And the reception afterward at his favorite little golf place with all of his buddies that he played shuffleboard with. It was spectacular. But Lori was like, oh, wow. I mean, gosh, $14,000. I just, and it's not like she didn't have the money. She didn't care how much it was. She just wasn't mentally, she did something she had never done before, which was to purchase something without being conscious of the cost, right? The reason they have all their savings and they're comfortable in their retirement is because they were smart and a little bit careful, not to an extreme. So here was something that was very out of character for her. Did she kick herself? I don't think so. But, she had that moment where the planning, I would not say was a 99 to 100% great experience, because she had that moment of doubt, right? That's another reason you should prearrange and possibly pre-fund, because those things can happen. Now, she's not going to take that to her grave. She's not kicking herself about it. The kids are all doing well, so they're not counting on inheritance and things like that.
Yeah,
but
right.
again, anybody who's listening might be able to find themselves or find that they've been in a similar situation, and hopefully they're nodding their head saying, wow, I don't want to get in a fight with my family. I don't want to do something uncharacteristic when I'm, making a financial commitment. And I don't want anybody to have any doubts about, what I want, even though the funeral is for the living, right? I don't want you to talk about my military career. It was important. I understand it was important for you, but I've lived, 60 years beyond that. That was when I was 19 and 20. But it also gives some kid an opportunity to say, Dad, I'm serving right now, and I would feel really bad if I could not wear my uniform and have you be recognized for that service. And Dad might say, go to H, or Dad might say, I didn't think of that, son. I am proud of you. And I'm proud that I served, and I'm proud that you served. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So it's really good to talk about these things. And that's really how we started the interview. You were telling us one of the things that you need to do is just talk about life, not talk about the death, but talk about the life, the person's life. What did they experience? What were their achievements? What were things that were difficult for them? What challenges did they face? And use those conversations as a way to think about what do you want at a funeral? We're all about advanced care planning here at the Heart of Hospice. We talk about advanced care planning all the time, which is about the health side of it. But at some point, we have to talk about the funeral then. And so this is why we're having this conversation with you today, is because we know that people are going to eventually need the services of a funeral director, a funeral home, a mortuary. So we're really encouraging our listeners to consider this very seriously. What is it that you want? Maybe not just for yourself, certainly for yourself, but what do your loved ones want? And have a conversation with them. So we're going to ask you our last question. If you could only share one piece of wisdom about funeral pre-planning, what would it be?
If I could share one piece of wisdom about funeral pre-planning, I would say that when you decide you need to do it, it doesn't have to be done and decided in one day. And adding to that, I would say that people, they talk about, hey, I have 3 daughters. Who's going to carry on the family name? And whatever. It's the family stories that are really, really important to carry on. There are cultures in the world, ancient and present, that are very good at weaving the tapestry of their family history and having it and presenting it to the next generation. We've gotten away from that. Thank you, Ancestry and 23andMe, for allowing us to know how much Neanderthal we have in us. But it doesn't tell the story, and whether your name gets passed on or whatever, I certainly hope that my children and grandchildren know enough about me to be able to celebrate me or laugh about me or have something in their heart when they think of me, hopefully positive. And part of what they know about me is for sure going to be what my dad was like and my grandfather was like, and maybe my great grandfather and great grandmother. And, what does our name mean? Where did we come from? Why did I raise you the way I raised you? Well, these are my values. So I would say that at every family gathering, whenever you have a chance, thank goodness we have Zoom and FaceTime now that we can talk to each other. I would say try and have conversations about life and living and memories whenever you can. Don't just, light the Hanukkah menorah. Don't just go on an Easter egg hunt. Don't just focus on presents. Take some time to ask these questions. Tell me about your favorite Christmas, Grandma. Ask those questions, because then over time, these things become important, and you realize when, God forbid, there's an illness or somebody has to go to hospice. If you haven't planned, at least you have something that you can do in that short amount of time. People stay in hospice. I think the average is like 59 days or something like that. I don't know what the latest statistic is, but I think it's
short.
almost, it's very short. I heard it was almost 2 months, but that's pretty short. But the point is that if you haven't talked about it, you've got 2 months, maybe, to plan something that expresses your life and that gives everybody a chance to participate. And that's why my best advice is to start talking about the times of your life as soon as possible and make sure that you in some way, shape, or form are recording them. I would never be too selfish to say, go out there, call your funeral director, plan and pay for your funeral right now. For some, it may not be the best time, but if you know the stories and you're thinking about those things, it does make it easier for when you go to the funeral of a loved one and that inspires you to plan for yourself. You've got a lot of the work done. So that would be my advice.
I love it. So, Dean, if somebody is interested in becoming part of the Love Always Project, how can they connect with you and get started?
The first thing I would do is go to our website, lovealwaysproject.org. On that website, you'll see the growing list of resources we have, blogs, family stories, our new forum. All we need is an email for you to join and just let us know what brought you to us. We will email you, but you can always opt out. We hope you don't, because that means we're not providing value, but we do want to maintain a connection. And then also on that website, you'll see our Facebook page, our Twitter page, and our Instagram. We're going to build a YouTube channel because we hope to get some video content. And I would hope that I could continue to have a relationship with you guys, reach out to you to maybe see if we can't get some content from you that can help folks that come to the Love Always Project. And it's not all about funeral pre-planning. It's about grief support. It's about all kinds of grief, anticipatory, which is something that I think a lot of people don't understand. It's all about, sharing memories with folks, like I told you. So there's a lot of things on there, and there's a lot of things we don't know yet that's going to be on there, because we certainly hope that the members of the Love Always Project influence or create most of the content on there. So I'm so excited to see what people do to share.
Awesome. We'll have links to everything in our show notes so our listeners can go straight in from there and connect with the Love Always Project.
Thank you so much.
Dean is obviously very skilled, very knowledgeable, and his personal experience, gaining that perspective, has only made him better at what he does.
It really has. And I think it almost came as a shock to him, the emotions that came out during that time when he was sitting down with the funeral director planning his son's funeral.
Yeah, he said it was just like something in his mind didn't function correctly.
Right.
And it sounds like he shut off for a while, right? They had to wait 30 minutes until they could get back to the conversation.
Yeah, I've known people who are so in charge in their personalities, and he talking about how he decided, this is what needs to come next, and just go, do
Right.
this, this is what needs to be done. He was following the checklist in his mind, but then when the funeral director talked about using the Harley hearse,
Yes.
it was like something snapped.
He couldn't believe that he had forgotten that, even though
Yeah.
he's worked in the Patriot Guard for a long time.
Exactly. And it just suddenly was like a slap in the face for him to realize, this is for my son.
Right. Why would I, at this particular time, why would I not remember? Because I know how important this is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're very pleased to encourage and recommend the Love Always Project. What they're doing is worthwhile, it's beneficial, and we hope that it helps you as an individual to make those pre-arrangements that you need to make. And we also hope that it helps you as a hospice professional to find the resources that would be useful for your families, your patients and their families. Find more information and to gain information that could be really, really helpful, because it's all about education, right?
Absolutely. So we would encourage you to visit thelovealwaysproject.org, and there'll be a link in the show notes for you to find so you can go straight in and connect with the work that they're doing. Provide an email. That's all they're asking for, so you can be connected with updates and the current work that they're doing.
Right. So our thanks to Dean Lambert for being on the podcast and talking more about the Love Always Project. And we hope this has been helpful for you as well.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice. I'm Helen Bauer here with Jerry Fenter. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and please take a minute to leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
You can always connect with us by sending us an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.